Hmm. Okay, so my topic was on the Anti-Federalists versus the Federalists. So we're going to go over a brief and kind of really super, actually simplified history of the US and how it kind of came to be. So just events that led up to the revolution where you had the taxes that were passed, such as, they had tea taxes that was a really big, well-known one, but they were being taxed from overseas without really saying it, so they felt that they had no ability to be a representation in that to Britain. They were just passing taxes over there and then getting taxed in the US for something they had no say in. And then you had in 1776, the Declaration of Independence was wrote by Thomas Jefferson. It was then ratified on July 4th of 1776 by the Continental Congress. You then had the creation of the Articles of Confederation. And then in 1786, you had Shays' Rebellion, which basically you had farmers revolting against heavy debts and because they were in very, very heavy debts. And it helped show the state and the governments that the state and the federal governments weren't the strongest and that they need to be renewed, kind of revised and gone over. So that helped led to the Constitutional Convention in 1787 to revise the Articles of Confederation, which also led to a completely new constitution being made. And then you went through the ratification process of the Constitution, which took a while because you had the two beliefs. So you had the Anti-Federalist and Federalist beliefs, and they both had their arguments of why theirs was right and why they should have theirs ideas kind of integrated into the government more. So that took a while. So if you just kind of look onto the anti-federalist beliefs, just briefly, they were big on no constitution. They didn't like it. They thought the government had too much power, and they thought the people didn't have enough rights. So they thought that without the people having enough rights, it kind of led into the thought of government having too much power because if you have people with no rights, the government can kind of just run amok and do whatever they want, really, without the people having enough say and kind of more power, because then it's more balanced. So a few things about the Federalists just briefly. They were big on the Constitution. They were big on a very strong national government, and they believed in the strong foundational structures of a new government. So they thought they should have the three branches of government. They thought they should have different things that just added to kind of be able to solidify how their government was so that they had more power. So more in-depth look on the Anti-Federalists. You had a few famous people like Patrick Henry and Thomas Paine. Thomas Paine wrote Common Sense in the American Revolutionary War. Patrick Henry thought there was a really big need for the Bill of Rights. Then they argued that without the Bill of Rights, the government would hold too much power against the people. So the Bill of Rights was the first 10 amendments now that we know of. Um, so your freedom of speech, right to bear arms, things like that, where it would give more power to the people and less power to the government, kind of gave it a little more balance. They thought the Constitution gave way too much power to the executive branch and at the expense of the legislative branch. So they thought the legislative branch should have more power since the legislative branch officials were elected by the people and not by the Electoral College. And they also thought that the state should have more power than the national, since the state was closer to the people, and therefore they thought the state would be able to better understand their problems and concerns of the national government. So an in-depth look on the Anti-Federalists, you had people like James Madison and Alexander Hamilton, John Jay, and Thomas Jefferson. So you had some really famous people, and they're well known. They wrote the Federalist Papers. They approached ratification debate by writing essays in the form of letters to citizens concerning specific concerns. So when they went through and was writing and telling people about kind of what they thought, they took into account what the Anti-Federalist was. So they took it, integrated in their ideas, and kind of sent it out to people. It's like, hey, we want this, but we can understand what the Anti-Federalists want. So we'll integrate some of these ideas. We'll give a Bill of Rights and whatnot will give some more power to the people. They also believed in separation of power. So they wanted those three branches of government, which are now the judicial, executive, and legislative. That's how it was back then too. They also believe that all government branches are equal in power and check each other. So the legislative branch doesn't have more power over the judicial. The judicial doesn't have more power over executive. They all are equal and they do their own things, but they can check each other, and one doesn't have more power than the other. So some similarities between the two parties. Both thought their ideas would benefit the US. So, the Anti-Federalists thought that if the power was more towards the people, that would really benefit the country, that the government couldn't really do much. So they were like, oh, heck yeah. And the Federalists thought that if they had a really strong government, that would benefit the US because, with a strong government, you have more power, more say what's going on in the US, right? And eventually they both obviously they integrate the ideas and we have laws in our Constitution that we have now today. They were both concerned over tyranny. I mean, they both fought in the American Revolution together. They weren't really split even during the ratification process. Their beliefs were split, but themselves as a country wasn't really split. Um, they really want to form a government that would be good for the uh, just the common good of everyone. So they both thought that their ideas were just the better idea for everyone. They didn't really do it out of selfishness. They were trying to take into account everyone, but some ideas weren't really taking account. Like the Federalists with a strong government doesn't really take account of the people in that idea. And they both wrote books and published their books. So you had the Federalists writing the Federalist papers, and the Federalist, Anti-Federalists wrote the Observations on the New Country and on the state and federal governments. Now, that was wrote by Mercy Warren. So they both had written books kind of about why they believed in what they believed and how it would benefit the country. So the differences between the two parties, you had size of government. That was a kind of like a really big, right in the face one. So you had your Federalist, really big government, lots of power to the government, and then you wanted your anti-federalists, which want a smaller government, more power to the people. So you also had beliefs in who should have greater power. All right, I just talked about that. The Federalists wanted more power to the government, less power to the people. I don't think they really want to control the people. I think it was just they thought with a stronger government, the nation could then benefit from that. And the Anti-Federalists thought that people should have more power because they thought if the government could have more power, then that could really devastate and cause problems later in the US. If the government decides to try to do something that would not let the people have any say in it. So they were big on people having power over the government. Your anti-federalists believed in more rights for people. Now I say originally because the Federalists thought that the people should have rights. It's not like they were like, oh yeah, the people shouldn't have rights at all. We should just have government that's control all things. They did take into account and understand actually that the Anti-Federalists wanted more rights for people. So that's why they integrated the Bill of Rights and some other things that gave more power to the people and kind of equaled and balanced it out a little bit. So why the Federalists prevailed, you had the really big one was that, like I said, they did take the Anti-Federalist beliefs and concerns into account. So when you're doing that, it kind of when you send out these papers and talk to people and eventually figure out who's doing what, a big role on why they prevailed was they did take, with them taking the beliefs into concerns into account, they showed that they did geez, they did think that people should have rights. So they had government had power and people had power. So that was a really big reason because if they didn't, it could have been the Anti-Federalist won and that we wouldn't really have as big of a government or the government we do now. Because the anti-federalists really didn't be like, hey, yeah, we should have big governments and checks and balances. But the federalists are like, hey, we should have big government checks and balances, but we'll take some of these, like the Bill of Rights, and we'll have these Bill of Rights, and we'll take your beliefs into account and we'll integrate with ours. So you kind of had half and half that one. They kind of had a more equal power created amongst the government, but they also gave power to the citizens as well. The Federalists had more rights for the citizens eventually, and the government had less power over them because of the Bill of Rights. That was a big one too. And then I feel like you had a lot more well-known, kind of popular people on the Federalist side and the Anti-Federalists, so that might have been a big role into why the Federalists prevailed. People know more, they kind of like, oh yeah, I'm gonna listen to him. So federalism is still used today. You have some different changes, but you have your big ones that are kind of easy ones to just look and make, oh yeah, these are still the same. You still have your three branches of government. Citizens hold power too. It's not just the government. I mean, we still have the Bill of Rights. Each branch still has checks and balances. The Constitution and Bill of Rights is still used and just active today. I mean, no one's like disregarding it. And then your presidents are still determined by electoral college votes or executive branch. So, our conclusion, Federalists were big in government, more power to the government, but then they eventually did take some ideas and concerns of the Anti-Federalists into account. The Anti-Federalists wanted a smaller government with more power to the people and more power to the state governments and to the national government. And then the Federalists prevailed due to combining the beliefs of both parties. And also, like I said, I believe they just had more well-known people, which also played a role in that. And here are my references.